My name's Natalie Brett. I'm head of college here at London College Communication. I've also got another interesting bit of my title, Pro Vice-Chancellor for University of the Arts London, which is what this college is part of, for those of you that don't know. I will test you at the end. So, welcome to the college. Welcome to those of you coming back. Welcome for those of you who are here for the first time. We're a very specialist college here of media and design, and we're probably one of the largest creative agencies in the world, I always say. And journalism is a very big part of that as well, and the way that we're developing that subject within the college. This is the 12th Cudlipp lecture. We're absolutely delighted to welcome Emily Bell to deliver the lecture tonight. There'll be a bigger introduction a bit later on. But I would really like to thank the Cudlipp Trust and also the Mirror Group as well for supporting this. It's a really important event in the calendar for us, and it's really important for our students to get this kind of experience really, and having a chance to network with some of you as well. So without much further ado, as it were, I'm going to hand over to Lloyd Embley, who is going to do some prize giving for us. So I shall hand over, and please enjoy your evening. There is filming going on, by the way, which is, is this for the website? Generally, yeah? And there will be drinks afterwards as well up in the gallery, and we've got an amazing exhibition going on up there. But enjoy. I'm really looking forward to this, so enjoy.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I can't quite believe that another year has gone by already. Those of you who were lucky enough to be here last year will remember some incredible words by David Walsh. No pressure, Emily. But it was an amazing insight into the mind of Lance Armstrong. And of course, we're reminded of this today as Lance tells us that if we ran back the clock, he'd still cheat, but he does think he deserves to be forgiven. The Daily Mirror is truly delighted to continue its support for the Hugh Cudlipp Award for Student Journalism. Judging this award is a very tough job indeed, and this year was no exception. The judges were particularly impressed by the number of entries that reached the kind of standards we would expect of professionals. There were also an impressive breadth of stories, from Britain's Naked Rambler to the campaign to stop the deportation of a teenage schoolgirl to Mauritius. As ever, we were looking for journalism which explained complex stories in a vivid and accessible way. The judges were also especially encouraged to see that in an industry facing significant challenges in the digital age, there is clearly a new generation of young journalists coming through who understand the need to get out on the road and find the story. So, the judges wanted to highly commend the BBC News Online investigation into the origins of the Ebola epidemic in Africa by Nassau Stiliano. The use of data and graphics was particularly impressive. But the winning entry this year is a first in two respects. Firstly, the winner, or should I say winners, are two people and not one. And secondly, they showed great innovation and enterprise in using video for the first time, joining forces to cover the extraordinary passions at play during the Scottish independence vote as the referendum boys. And here's a little video.
Against the Gases. We're here to vote for no fair play in your country. We want to be part of the United Kingdom. first vote. Imagine if our first vote is actually making such a big change.
Great, so I think it's now time to say that the very worthy winners of this year's Cudlipp Award are Ryan Ramgogan and Adam Barr.
Thank you to the judges for choosing us for this award. We had no expectation when we went out to Glasgow that we would end up here on stage. We'd like to thank City University for their help over the year and the equipment that we were given for the referendum, otherwise we would never have been able to do it. And lastly, for the people of Glasgow. They made the referendum boys a success, and we wouldn't be here without their kind of candid and honest accounts over the 3 or 4 days we were there.
Obviously just to reiterate what Ryan said about the people of Glasgow. It was fantastic, and we just had such a great time while we were out there. They made it really easy, really fun, especially having started in London. You know, people in Scotland are super easy to talk to, so that's great.
Very exceptional start after a while. But, we've kind of learned from our lessons from the Scottish referendum, and we're going to be starting our own kind of digital journalism website in March, so please look out for that, and hopefully the referendum boys can become a name that will be in all households in some kind of form in the next couple of years. But thank you very much for choosing us, and enjoy the evening.
Well, I think the guys are definitely hit on something, because I suspect there may be a couple of elections or so this year. Anyway, I would now like to hand over to Paul Charman. Paul is, as you probably know, Principal Lecturer in Journalism here, and is your host for the rest of the evening. Thank you very much.
The task of explaining, let alone predicting, how our brave new digital world is transforming the dynamics of human culture and society is probably one of the most challenging we have. Whether it's the news business, national security, our own security, the new cyber wars between governments and corporations, to the way we do business, to the very way we communicate. New impacts in headlines almost every week now. Just one of the virtues of our speaker tonight is that her career straddles the heights of both old and new media, with, I think, a deep understanding and even a love of both. After reading jurisprudence at Oxford, Emily Bell began humbly in journalism on Big Farm Weekly. I checked this earlier, got it from Wikipedia. Thank you very much. Before joining the advertising business magazine Campaign in 1988. Within 2 years, she joined the Observer, where she became business editor a decade later. But it was at The Guardian that she was to make digital history. After editing the Media Guardian website, she went on to become editor-in-chief of The Guardian Unlimited in 2001, pioneering digital journalism in Britain. Her knowledge and expertise earned her a seat not only on the board of the newspaper, but also as a non-executive director of the Control of the Scott Trust. Today, she is an international authority on all things digital in her role as director of the Tower Center for Digital Journalism at the Columbia School of Journalism in New York City. Tonight, hot foot from Davos, advising the master of the universe, who better to help us take stock of the possibilities and the perils of the future, of the digital future, not least for popular journalism. So on behalf of the Public Trust, the London College of Communication, and our sponsors, the Daily Mirror, Will you please give a very warm welcome to Emily Bell.
God, it's like getting an Oscar. Talk among yourselves. Good evening, everybody. And thank you very much indeed. I'm extremely honoured to be here. Thank you particularly to the trustees, the Cudlipp trustees. Thank you also to the Daily Mirror. It's not very often I say that. And mean it, but I really do. Thank you very much indeed to the London College of Communication, to Paul. Thanks to Natalie, who's the head of college, and Karen Arskin, who's the dean of the School of Media. Now I work in a university, they're sort of getting the titles of the administrators of office right is actually the thing that makes me most nervous. After that, basically, you talk and students sleep. I was a tabloid journalist for one day. This is not actually the beginning of a Daily Mail confessional, but a statement of fact. I did one shift on the Londoners' Diary, the Evening Standard, in about 1986, when I was a student, like you guys. The highlight of the day, actually probably my career, was that I got taken to the pub by Keith Waterhouse. How many students here know who Keith Waterhouse is? Hands up. Okay, to put this in context, being taken to the pub by Keith Waterhouse as a journalist would be like Taylor Swift liking one of your Tumblr posts and sending you a box of biscuits. So I said I was going to get Taylor Swift and Keith Waterhouse in here, and I did. Despite bonding with Keith, I was sacked at the end of day one. I'd also point out that I also wrote the lead item in the Londoners' Diary. And I was sacked, or rather I was not asked back, which is basically the same thing. It was not, actually, after my 3 gin and tonics at lunch for being drunk at my desk, which was actually entirely expected. But I was sacked for not being posh enough. I had a posh name, I'd been to a posh university, so they assumed I would indeed be posh and a conduit for the goings-on in Eaton Square. So before you say, what does a Guardian journalist who works at an Ivy League university know about tabloid journalism, I just want you to know I was once a tabloid journalist, but not posh enough to make a career of it. So there. Actually, and then my dealings I love dealing with the tabloid press. Sorry, this is not in the speech. I promised to keep the boring bits really short. But I did report on media for a good sort of 10 years. And my favourite thing was when I had to talk to Kelvin Mackenzie for stories. Because this was before you had mobile phones. Students, again. There was a time when you spoke down a phone attached to the floor by a curly wire. It was before we had mobile phones, and it was before you had those discrete answer phones. So when you had a message, a light would flash, and it would play to the entire office. And often, sort of without fail, on Sunday night when my answer phone was flashing, I would press a button and a voice would ring out. "Kelvin here," it would say. Then there would be a pause, and he would say, "Your fucking editor could not edit a fucking bus ticket." I feel this is under the cloak of anonymity, because this is a period where the Observer had 5 editors in 5 years. So if you're thinking it might be you, it's certainly not. It's the other guy. Anyway, ring me back. I've got a story if you know what one of those is. Sorry, I digress. Those are the funny bits over. Tonight I want to talk about the digital tabloid. And that really means talking about what's happening to popular journalism on the web. Tabloids always had the biggest reach, the largest impact, the most lively journalism or flexible standards, depending on how you interpret it. On the web, however, these days, I think that we're seeing something that I would describe as almost the tabloidization of everything, of all journalism. And I don't actually mean that as a negative. All news outlets now need numbers. In the web economy, you need numbers that are vastly bigger than they had been in the analogue world. Firstly, you have to have that because you need to make the economics work. Digital dimes, as we say, versus analogue dollars. So your numbers need to be bigger by at least a magnitude of 10. And secondly, to have impact. It is a world now of so much information that if you are not reaching lots of people, it is unlikely that you'll have any impact. The demands of web-scale economies have actually had some very negative impacts as well. They have, for instance, completely torpedoed regional and local press in the States. We haven't been able to find a new model for it yet. I hope that we will do one day. I hope that you will here, because it's a really, really important function. But it is one of those areas where actually scale doesn't work for journalism. But they've also driven great innovation and a new set of entrepreneurial skills into journalism. But attaining size in the world, we're going into does mean surrendering control to the systems that deliver it. Going viral is a goal in nearly all newsrooms. The protocols and networks that give us that virality were never conceived, actually, with the idea of journalism in mind. I think that has brought us to a very, very interesting point and a challenging moment in the press and in broader society. So the too long didn't read version. I was actually going to turn this, sorry, this is also not in the speech. I had the really good idea at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, when I was slightly sleep deprived, of turning this actually literally into a Buzzfeed list and putting it on their website. And I wondered how long it would take to do it. And then I gave up and I thought, no, I'll just do a too long didn't read version. So the too long didn't read version of this speech is that journalism needs a lot more journalists who are technically proficient. And by technically proficient, I mean have a deep understanding and ability to work with web technologies. And the new gods, these platform companies, social networks and search engines, need to hire a lot more technologists who are proficient in the values of news and journalism. Because I think at the moment, we have a situation which is not quite working for either of us. Those of us engaged in what journalism is and will be, who have a direct and vested interest in the protection of free speech and standards for information, have an awful lot to do. But we also need to do it together, because we're now part of one continuous global information loop, with all the advantages and threats that that presents. Hugh Cudlipp, Lord Cudlipp as he became, understood that to have authority, impact, and a business model, you had to achieve scale, and he did. The Daily Mirror under him peaked at 5 million sale a day, which I think made it the largest selling newspaper, not just in the UK. Sorry,
I've lost 4 million.
Okay, you've lost... 50,000. You're just bringing circulation down to a more manageable level, Lloyd. He sold 5 million copies a day, and that actually made it the largest selling newspaper in the world, so don't feel too bad, because it was really quite an achievement. It achieved that by a combination of 3 things. A strong sense of what the role of journalism could play in the lives of its audience, great reporting, courageous editing, standing up to governments, and a thorough knowledge of how to put contemporary technology into the service of journalism. Cudlipp was highly creative within the boundaries of his time. I wonder now, confronted with the unbounded possibilities, what would Hugh Cudlipp do? How would he interpret the job of editor and journalist in the digital age? When he was appointed editorial director of the Mirror in 1952, newspaper groups really were the big beasts. They were the way that people found out about the world. Their only competition was coming really from BBC Radio News at that time and from newsreels. Even then, there was not really a proper television service. Even during the rise of TV news, which changed journalism profoundly, newspaper businesses retained a dominant position, not just in the media industry, but also in popular culture. The internet and the World Wide Web have completely transformed that landscape. We're seeing unimaginably large new entities which get their size from publishing not just a selected number of stories, but everything in the world. Social networks and search engines are the masters of this universe. As we see the disappearance of print as a significant medium and the likely decline of broadcast television, the paths our stories and journalism must travel down to reach readers and viewers are being shaped by technologies beyond our control. And when I say beyond our control, I mean beyond our control as journalists, and actually often beyond our control, even as a collective society. Even the individual companies themselves have unleashed something that they're not always quite sure what to do with. A recent study from the Pew Research Center suggested 39% of Americans have seen news on politics and government on Facebook in the past week. And another Pew study confirmed that now 30% of adults in America consider Facebook to be their #1 news source. Think about that. That's not the internet, that's Facebook. That's one outlet. In Britain, the number of people getting their news from social media is rising. A poll for Havas, quoted in the Press Gazette in October, found 27% of people use Facebook as a source for local news and 11% use Twitter. The platforms might change. Next year could be WhatsApp. The next year after, who knows? Who knows is my new social app startup. But the behaviour will not. These numbers will only increase. And we as journalists have both, in turn, enthusiastically and reluctantly been complicit in this growth. The most powerful trend in journalism today is full integration with reporting, presentation, distribution of journalism through the social web. The sharing and liking economy is literally changing the shape of what we do at a pace that we're having to run to keep up with. 20 years ago, I always like this sort of as the history students, is that I bet you have journalists here, journalism professors who say, in my day, so this is that bit. This is to give you some idea of the speed at which we're moving. 20 years ago, we had the very first creaky efforts to get newspapers onto the internet at all, squeezed through copper wires, dial-up modems. 15 years ago, nobody had a camera on a mobile phone. 10 years ago, no one had a smartphone. 5 years ago, Instagram didn't exist. Today, the new newsroom has optimization desks to make stories work better on social media. Data scientists who analyse the information about how every single story performs and which tell journalists how to write headlines, produce photographs, report stories which will be liked and shared more than others. It has aggregation desks which scour the web to find news that ordinary people have posted on their own private accounts. It has audience insight desks that work on how to get more people to spend longer reading more journalism. And it has data desks, which take the newly available sources of information in vast quantities and use the latest mining tools and techniques to clean, interpret, and visualize information in new ways. And this is before you start on the set of skills that you guys have to learn now just to get your daily work done. Integrating with the web means responding quickly to what people want. The way new social media platforms have been designed encourages certain types of use and elevates certain types of journalism. The formats that work well on social media have certain characteristics Hugh Cudlipp would have been very familiar with. Lists work well. Pictures are even better. Games are even better than that. I saw incidentally a fascinating talk by a games expert in New York 2 weeks ago who was talking about how you design for repetitive behaviour within certain systems. And it's something which I know that there are people here tonight who do that brilliantly for news consumption. And somebody told me that I think Buzzfeed have hired 50 games developers. So that gives you some idea of how we're chasing these metrics of size and engagement in a really different way. A viral story, of course, is the holy grail. Usually there's a cat involved or a wombat falling off a sofa. There needs to be bathos and pathos. Actually, if there was a wombat falling off a sofa, I probably would watch it. Headlines need to be intriguing and chatty. They need to make you click, which is very different from when I was on the web, when they had to say exactly what was in the story, otherwise nobody read them. And the number of people who see these stories are, when we say viral, we don't mean hundreds of thousands, we mean millions, sometimes tens of millions. Almost every news operation, with a very small number of exceptions, is pursuing this model in one form or another. Tabloid or popular journalism is being done by the same outlets that produce the most serious chin-stroking think pieces. I'm not looking at you, Alan, it's all right. In 2005, the Huffington Post pioneered what they called a mullet strategy for journalism. This is where you look neat and respectable. You've never heard of mullet strategy. Which look neat and respectable at the front and slightly hairy and wild at the back. The overall effect would be aesthetically jarring, but generally, people choose only to look at one side at once. So that approach is now refined by a new generation of digitally native news organisations like the ubiquitous Buzzfeed, more on them later, Vice, Upworthy, Mashable, Policy Mike, or Mike as they now are, Playbuzz, Vocative. You know, every week there is at Vox, 538. All of these entities have these key characteristics in thinking about how to reach audiences on different platforms. Even legacy news companies are actually getting rather good at this. It's great actually giving this talk at the Mirror because of the Red Top papers. I can say this again, I'm not lying. I think it's making the most progress on the web. I think their snappy news games and visualizations, its own internal startup, Us versus Them and Amped, are actually genius. And I'm not just saying that because Martin Beelan was a great colleague of mine at The Guardian, but because they've provided me with fantastic classroom material. They have a wonderful game that you should play called Where is Damascus? And there's nothing like standing up in front of Ivy League graduate students and saying, who wants to play a game? They all go, yes. You say, right, who's going to come up here and locate Damascus on this map? And there are always two people who know exactly where Damascus are, normally because they've come from there. Go, me! I say, not you. And then we have a very interesting discussion about, is this really journalism? And the conclusion is always yes. It's a new, engaging, different way of bringing people into a very important story, of making them think about why they're being asked to engage with it. So there we go, ad for the Mirror over. A few months ago, I had a coffee with a senior journalist in New York whose editor-in-chief had been expressing dismay at how little traffic was being referred back to their stories from the social media platforms. What is the right percentage, they asked? Does anybody know? Actually, no, because the answer, as often on the web, is depends. But it seems we were all working on it, and the general view is the higher the better. There's a whole other talk I could give, it's all right, I'm not going to, at how bad we are at currently measuring journalism, at how terrible our metrics are, and at how, if you get your metrics wrong for journalism, it takes the whole enterprise in a completely different direction from the one that you might otherwise want to pursue. Social media companies know that having the news industry fully engaged in using their tools is also important to them. Every major social platform has a team dedicated to working with newsrooms to help them get the most out of their technologies. Until now, though, this relationship has been mostly a one-way street. Journalism has been very engaging on the terms of technical values created in Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley has, in return, been putting a tiny, tiny fraction of its billions into working with journalists. The balance, though, has tipped to a point where I think this is likely to change, and change very soon. The numbers suggest that these super platforms are the free press, taking over many of the functions of mainstream media. Social, I don't mean necessarily reporting boots on the ground, but I do mean in other ways which are nearly, but not quite as important. Social networks are now attracting the same pressures and challenges at a much larger scale than journalists and civic media have been wrestling with for years. YouTube has 1 billion visitors a month. 400 hours of video is uploaded every minute. We watch about an hour of video on YouTube for every person on the planet every month. That's just in my house. I have 3 teenage boys, 2 teenage boys, 1 younger. So I speak with great authority on internet use. In social networks, the numbers are similarly impressive. Facebook has over 800 million active users. WhatsApp has 700 million active users. Instagram has over 300 million. And for those of you who've been doing the business course in your journalism studies, you will know that those three platforms are all owned by Facebook. Twitter has 300 million active users. I love Twitter. It is a great tool for journalists. And it's worth remembering that 40% of people who use Twitter don't ever post anything, but they just read. So that is their newswire. That is their front page. Google, which owns YouTube, has a market capitalization of $340 billion. By contrast, the once unstoppable Murdoch companies, across publishing and TV, so this is not his demerged companies, these are both together, have a market capitalization of around 80 billion, which makes them just over twice the size of Twitter. And on the web, Britain's largest daily newspaper, The Sun, has 225,000 online subscribers. I say that not to make a cheap joke, though you are allowed to laugh in the front row, but to illustrate a really important point. The Sun on the web actually has a paywall, a subscription model which works for News International. We know it works because News International often say it's working. But it's no longer part of the popular journalism ecosystem, certainly not for demographics under 25 years of age. Its young male readership are all laughing at the lad Bible on Facebook. Journalism is a thin thread in a vast new global transparency of conversation, information, context, breaking news. But that thread, I would argue, keeps the whole cloth together. Because when it works as it should, it gives people a daily feed of important, entertaining, interesting, timely, and sometimes crucial information that they can trust. As social media has become increasingly powerful in our economy and in our culture, we're beginning to both see the consequences of a global free information society. We also, dare I say it, might start to miss the sense of mission historically associated with the press. The problems the press creates when it works badly, errors of fact and interpretation, opacity, carelessness, are amplified by new technologies and new capabilities a millionfold. We need the values of journalism when it works well in software as much, if not more, than we need them elsewhere. What are those values? Well, first of all, making sure news is accurate, which seems pretty basic. Making sure it's accountable if it's not accurate. Being transparent about the source of stories and information. Standing up to governments, pressure groups, commercial interests, the police if they intimidate, threaten, censor, or you or your sources. Knowing when you have a strong enough public interest defence to break the law. And being prepared to go to jail and defend your story and sources if you really believe in that public interest case. Knowing when it's unethical to publish something, even when it's not illegal. Balancing individual rights to privacy with the broader right of the public interest and the public's right to know. Now, I am not saying the traditional press has always covered itself in glory in maintaining and upholding these standards. In fact, all too often, particularly in times of financial distress, the opposite has been the case. But I think we can all agree that these principles are actually not high-minded, unattainable objectives, but they are actually basic requirements for anybody aiming to do journalism. These responsibilities are not, however, shared, and they are certainly not liked by social platforms. Google and Facebook are magnitudes larger and richer than any other publishing entity. They're more influential in terms of reach than any other press company has been in the history of the planet. Until now, the default position of the participants in the sharing economy, with the exception perhaps of Twitter, has been to avoid the expensive responsibility and darker, more complex aspects of hosting the free press. This is entirely understandable. And it's not, it has to be said, done with particularly bad faith on their part. They simply haven't really seen it as their job. Engineers are not trained to think about moral consequences. I know this because I often go and talk to engineers. And when I say, so if you do that and this happens, they say, but the technology's not to blame. Then I explain to them that somebody has actually built the technology and forgotten to put in a way of stopping that outcome. And they go, I see what you mean. And it's not, as I say, because these people are some of the most brilliant people in the world, but it's just not how they're trained to think. They're actually educated to produce efficient systems, which they earnestly and often rightly believe will improve society. Similarly, most journalists do not really know enough about technology to understand how you design software, and that when you do so, you can include all sorts of decisions, you can build algorithms, which are essentially and profoundly editorial. And both sides of this equation, I think, really has to change. We're taking it very, very seriously as a mission at Columbia Journalism School, where we teach, I'm sorry, obviously, I'm sure it's the same at LCC, so just ignore this next bit. At Columbia Journalism School, where we teach data, computational journalism, and as of this year, digital security, threat modelling, encryption, at a higher level to more students than at any other journalism school in the world. That's not so much a boast, but rather a sign that, like the profession of journalism, education is scrambling to keep up with these issues. Our research programme at the Tower Centre is looking at the intersection of technology and journalism and how it can and will change our field. Our subjects include how new technologies, from drones to sensors to virtual reality to bots that write and then read stories, are going to affect journalism. Ethics and legality are central to this discussion. It's not just how you build and use them, it's also what can they do. In a world we're going into, you'll be able to see everything, but what should you report? What should you put your name on? How social platforms and journalism work together will be a major research project starting this year, and so will algorithmic accountability, which is continuing work on something that we think is rapidly becoming one of the most important areas for journalists to investigate and for the public to understand. The veracity and transparency of our news information system is just too important to be left to commercial, non-journalistic entities. But the journalism school is actually the beginning of the pipeline, not the end. I'm glad we are up with even ahead of the industry in identifying these areas and training journalists to be fluent in technology. But to have a real impact, the change must also happen in every single part of the system. I've argued before, and I'm going to argue again tonight, that the mission that motivated Cudlipp and other great editors, the reason why he worked so assiduously at building the largest possible audience, is a mission which must find its new digital expression. It has to be shared by all who profit from the world of telling stories to itself. Cudlipp was a master of form and format. He knew that he had to connect to audiences in languages that they understood, with all the methods technology gave him. In creating journalism of impact today, though, we've gone through exactly the same process as Hugh Cudlipp did then. We have to decide how to make an impact without the benefit of owning or controlling the distribution chain. In a report I co-authored in 2012 with Clay Shirky and Chris Anderson, called Post-Industrial Journalism, Adapting to the Present, we talked about exactly this system of mass publishing empowerment, and that journalism, as it became distributed in new systems, faced a dilemma. On the one hand, it enables individuals, so news is made and shared outside the newsroom, which we think is a good thing. On the other hand, though, it weakens the institutions that have traditionally made journalism strong. Although I think all of us see vastly more benefit in the systems we have now, the problem of how to strengthen journalism in its broadest sense under its new definitions is a very hard one. Let's look at some practical examples of what I'm talking about. So who in this room, hopefully all the journalists will put their hands up, students you don't have to, but if you do I'll be very impressed. Who in this room have heard of Geordie Mayer and Ramsey Orta? Very good, Lloyd. I'm not going to ask you who they are. You might not have heard of them, but you have, I guarantee, seen their work on every news channel, in every paper, on every news site you have visited in the last 3 months. Geordie Mayer lives in Paris. On Wednesday, the 7th of January, on Wednesday, the 7th of January, 3 weeks ago, he happened to look out of his apartment window when he heard a disturbance in the street. What he saw were 2 masked gunmen, and as a reflex, he took out his phone to film them. With a remarkably steady hand, he captured the horrifying footage of 2 assailants murdering policeman Ahmed Merabet as he lay on the ground, part of the horrific attacks on the Charlie Hebdo officers. What he did next, Mayer told Agence France-Presse, was he put it on Facebook. His reflex to publish came from his frequent use of social media. I take a picture of a cat, I put it on Facebook. It was the same stupid reflex. Stupid or heroic? After 10 minutes or so, Mayer, who was still really in shock, reconsidered the decision to publish to his 2,500 followers, and he took it down. But by then it was too late. Someone had uploaded the video to YouTube. Within an hour, Mayer was alarmed to see his own film on the television news. The clip is an iconic, chilling, unforgettable, and informative piece of news footage. The film is undoubtedly in the public interest. If you had shot it as a journalist, you would have published it. But it's also an invasion of Mr. Merabet's privacy, a shock to his grieving family who cannot unsee the footage, and potentially a risk to Mr. Mir himself. Yordi Mir didn't have the luxury of an editor, or even the possibility of changing his mind. He doesn't now have the protection of an editor or legal advice or leading counsel from any of the organisations that used his film. In fact, for most of them, he didn't have any credit whatsoever. Now let's taste the case of Ramsey Orta. Orta is a 22-year-old Staten Island resident with, let's say, a slightly sketchy record with the police, who on the 17th of July last year was standing on Bay Street with his friend Eric Garner, who had just broken up a fight on the pavement outside a beauty salon. The police arrived once the scuffle was over, but instead of driving off as peace was restored, officers turned their attention to Garner, who is a father of 6, and who was known, again to the police, for the petty tax crime of selling loose cigarettes. In questioning Garner about his own activities, the police moved in on him. He didn't fight back, he didn't protest, but he did ask them to stop harassing him. He was put in an illegal chokehold and wrestled to the ground. His friend Orta did what Mr. Mir did in Paris. He got out his phone, he filmed the incident. "I can't breathe," said Garner, as the policeman throttled him. The film shows an asthmatic Garner lying cuffed on the ground. He repeats those words, "I can't breathe," 11 times. We know this because we have Orta's film. The chokehold and restraint made Garner lose consciousness, and as we now know, he died of a heart attack in his way to hospital in the ambulance. Orta's video found its way to the New York Daily News, and its publication was a sensation, and it was a spur to the outrage and disbelief New York citizens felt when in August a grand jury decided not to indict any of the officers involved. Hundreds of thousands of people stopped traffic in New York and around the country for 3 or 4 days after that. The New York Police Department has been in open revolt against its civic mayor. Along with the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, it's blown open the most important social issue for America today, which is that of racial inequality. Someone involved in the case was arrested, though, and I imagine you can guess who it was. Orta, the man who shot the video, was arrested on separate gun possession charges a day after the grand jury decision. Police point to a long record of minor offences. Orta says he was targeted and set up for shooting the film. As with Mir, Orta reflexively performed a spontaneous act of a witness of journalism, which has had personal consequences for him that he might not have anticipated. He said he always pulls his phone out if he thinks the police might arrest him as protection. I use these sensational stories, which have had such tangible effects, and as an illustration of what impact a single person can have, but also to highlight how we now have publishing systems which can amplify every act, alert the world to important events, but which also don't yet afford these new forms of journalism the same protections as the old. They don't give Yordi Mir the protection of an editing process or Ramsey Orta the protection, the authority of an institution. They barely give them the status of a source. Journalism is moving faster than the speed of thought. It's spreading beyond the newsroom, beyond the geographic and cultural boundaries that once limited its audiences, carried there by programs engineered, as we know, for instantaneous global communication. Mir and Orta are not journalists, but they are sources. They were not on the staff of any newspaper or agency, they were not paid a salary, they had no training, they were not members of any union, they have no added protections that might be afforded to the press. It's important for social platforms and news organisations to include these people within them, to include these people with mobile phones who fill our pages because we need them and because we have a responsibility towards them in both a broad and specific sense. They might not be journalists, they might not get the protection that sources would get, but they are part of our ecosystem of news. Last year we actually we did a report from the Townsend where we looked at the use of user-generated content, which we found was pretty much a daily, very frequent occurrence across every single broadcast outlet that we looked at. But we also found that news outlets didn't credit, they weren't very good at telling whether or not it was a verified piece of footage. They were generally extremely careless. Companies like, sorry, where are we? Oh yes, So we're very bad at verification techniques. Companies like Storyful, which has recently been bought by Rupert Murdoch, were way ahead of the curve in understanding that aggregation and authentication of material is a central function now for a newsroom. This morning, I woke up to an even more powerful example of why we have a problem. Yesterday, The Guardian broke the story that Google had handed over private emails between WikiLeaks staff to the FBI in the wake of the cables leak and not told the staff about it for nearly 3 years. Google is legally obliged to hand over material when it's told to by a secret warrant, as it was in this case. But it also potentially has an obligation to tell an organisation like WikiLeaks what it has done. Google has been encouraging us to think of it as a platform that supports free speech. Its several $100,000 contribution to Charlie Hebdo is a case in point. But this is a chilling reminder of either how little Google understands what supporting free speech really means, or its naked dishonesty. It is inconceivable that a serious news organisation would do such a thing to a source and not be put out of business. It calls into question Google's trustworthiness as a platform. It also highlights how poorly the press has behaved in respect of WikiLeaks. As Trevor Tim, head of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, wrote in The Guardian today, the outrageous legal attack on WikiLeaks and its staffers is an attack on the freedom of the press itself, and it's shocking more people are not raising their voices, not their pens or their keyboards in protest. Healthy journalism relies on a system which supports all parts, a free press, and at the moment I don't think that we have that. The speed and scale dominate the world of information. How these platforms sort and present stories back to the world, what they do with the data associated with them, is a matter of commercial sensitivity and deep secrecy. If they have our instant messages, emails, and private contacts, but don't protect sources, then as a society, we are in deep trouble. Never before in the history of journalism has the power and reach of a small number of players had such a decisive effect on the market, and never before have we known so little about its operation. Delving into the past of the Northcliffe dynasty, I was reminded that the wealth that supported this great newspaper empire, which created the Mirror, the Mail, the Sun, saved the Times and the Observer, came from a foundation of what Alfred Harmsworth described as useless information. His first extremely popular publication was called Answers to Correspondence, and it was the viral content of its day. I'm sure that given the opportunity, Northcliffe would, had he been able to do so, made full use of digital formats. 17 horses that look like Sarah Bernhardt, 25 below-stairs staff who are having a worse day than you. The Duchess of Kent has got a new hairstyle and you'll never guess what happened next. The success of Northcliffe in his initial enterprise meant that much of the British press was built on the entrepreneurial understanding of how to exploit literacy levels among working and middle-class people. It combined industrial publishing technologies with emergent mass transportation systems. What Hugh Cudlipp brought to this strategy was vision, empathy, and most importantly, mission. In the internet age, we are still in our answers phase of development, and we sorely, sorely need the mission. I don't think at all that this is a hopeless situation. I think we're already seeing signs of serious success now for mainstream and even mass-market digital journalism. Right now, we're seeing the rise of the first generation of large-scale digitally native organisations and the vigorous adoption of digital-only strategies by existing legacy businesses. The most successful new digitally native journalism companies are those who have fully integrated themselves into the fabric of this new dominant platforms. And the most successful legacy news organisations, in terms of reaching large audiences on the web, are those, dare I say it, like the Daily Mail and The Guardian, that have experimented with or shifted the format or substance of their journalism to do the same. For The Guardian, it has meant relentlessly pursuing what we originally set out as long ago as 2001 to be what we called of the web, not just on the web. For us at the time, this meant web production editorial working on equal footing with our technologists and developers. It also meant paying very close attention to what was happening on the web outside the field of journalism. For the Mirror, as mentioned before, it's meant lots of new projects. So far from traditional print stories that they bend the definition of journalism in a very good way. And for the Daily Mail, it has meant the sidebar of shame. Incidentally, I don't know if it's changed, probably has at The Guardian, I'm sure that Alan or Janine can tell us. At lunchtime, if you walked around The Guardian newsroom, you could actually see the clicking of people as they tried to get off the Daily Mail website as you walked past them. For the 10 years at The Guardian, I had the great joy of working with a team that energetically went about experimenting with how we could translate the character and values of our journalism into our software development, our data policies, our digital reporting and formats. We negotiated a route towards what Alan Rusbridge had defined as open journalism. It came from the desire to build our technology and new forms of journalism with the same values that C.P. Scott had laid out over 150 years previously. It set The Guardian on a path where it could publish the brilliant and important stories like WikiLeaks and the NSA disclosures, internationally and securely to far wider audiences than would have been possible in just print. When I started working online at The Guardian in 2000, we had 1 million monthly unique users. When I left 10 years later, we had 60 times that. Now it's over 100 million. The most startling publishing success story in America of the past 5 years has been Jonah Peretti's transformation of Buzzfeed, which he started as a social traffic side project to the innovative Huffington Post, hence the Mullet strategy, but which has now grown into America's most copied news company. I visit many newsrooms around the world, and the B word is everywhere. As Peretti himself says, there are great journalism institutions out there, and there are excellent technology companies, but few places pay as much attention to working on both as BuzzFeed. I would agree with that, actually. And this is the key. Peretti himself is a creative technologist with editorial flair. BuzzFeed works on the principle of understanding the social web and building on top of it. It also works because it understands the maths of the social web. For BuzzFeed to grow its 400-strong staff, the advertising rates of the internet dictate it must have massive audiences. It's widely studied for being for its sophistication of thought that it gives, how technology and journalism work together. Even the New York Times paid it significant attention in its own internal leaked innovation report, published incidentally on BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed, said the Times, Huffington Post and USA Today are not succeeding simply because of lists, quizzes, celebrity photos and sports coverage. They are succeeding because of their sophisticated social search and community building tools and strategy, and often in spite of their content. That's just the Times dig at the end. Peretti is like Northcliffe on steroids. The answers phase of the strategy lasted 2 years, not 20. Now he's adding foreign correspondents, feature writers, and an investigation unit. I am hopeful, even optimistic, that this understanding of how to create and harness scale in mass market journalism can support serious mission and a new set of standards for journalism too. There are also some signs that the social media companies are giving way on the point that they are not just platforms. We've seen over the past year how Twitter decided it would directly intervene in the circulation of beheading videos. Google will now have to formulate a better answer for its WikiLeaks decision than we were just following the rules. When we're building the new newsrooms of the future and working out how to make our journalism powerful on the social web, we need to build in some of our mission-driven values and processes alongside the rocket fuel of our cat gifts. We've cracked the problem of how to develop popular journalism on the internet with our mixture of cute animals and data science. We can crack the problem of how to make popular journalism important and robust in the digital world too. But it isn't a solo mission, and it's not a competitive mission, and it's not going to be quick or easy. We will need more than investment in social sharing strategies. We will need an open and collaborative dialogue, both with each other and with the new masters of the information universe, who have the resources and the audiences to help. We need to edit for new types of journalism and journalists. We need to recognise that the free press is more than professional journalists, more than platform technologies. The digital tabloid sounds like an oxymoron. Maybe it is. Popular journalism, which reaches a mass market with reliable, timely information that your audiences want to read, is as real and as important as ever. And publishing is powerful, really powerful. It's enormously so, it's dangerously so. Hugh Cudlipp's book bore the battle cry for the journalists, "Publish and be damned." But that came from a time when we knew who the publishers were, and we could imagine what damnation meant. This too is altered by the internet. When terror organisations, psychopaths, corrupt corporations are the publishers, damnation looks rather different to an angry phone call from number 10. Publish and be damned sounds daring, appealing, almost. Publish and be murdered at your desk. Publish and be overwhelmed with foul-mouthed threatening messages. Publish and be imprisoned without due process. Publish and be beheaded for a publicity stunt. Publish and be blown up in a basement in Homs. Publish and have your office smashed up and your family intimidated. Publish and put a stranger's life in danger. These sound slightly less swashbuckling and much more threatening. But this is what's happening, not just in Paris, but in Egypt, in Mexico, in Iran, in Syria, in Saudi Arabia, in Britain, in America, everywhere, in fact. I think for a while, journalism thought it couldn't afford the difficult bits, the investigations, the new technology skills, the legal teams, the time for these more complicated problems. We could only secure our survival with automatically generated dancing hamsters and robot-written press releases. Now, when we look at the mighty new networks of our age, I hope we all realise, us and them, that these are the very things that we cannot not afford to do. So what would Hugh Cudlipp do today? I'd like to think he would learn to code. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That was just before I expired of heat stroke, so well done. I think I can... Is it questions now? Yeah. Sorry, Paul, did you want to say something?
Not at all. Just wanted to sort of invite questions from the audience.
Can't see anybody.
Thank you very much indeed.
Questions. So fascinating that they're all thinking, when is the pub open? Can
I start?
Oh, you can. Yes.
Do I?
No. Sorry for overruling. Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry, I forgot you to speak all this one.
One of the most alarming statistics that you've given is the fact that, you know, so many people, particularly Americans, are getting their news, as you say, from the new publishers, the Googles of this world. But the point's been made that the originators are still the news organisations.
Yes.
What do you say to that?
Well, so that's true, and that's why we engage with them. If they weren't news organisations, we wouldn't be developing social strategies. But we don't know exactly how they're choosing which stories to show us. And we don't know that because they won't show us how they change the news algorithm. There was a really interesting piece actually the other day by somebody who said that he'd just done a manual count of the types of stories that had been appearing in his Facebook feed. And he mapped them out on a sort of a spreadsheet. And he showed that sort of over the course of about 3 weeks, the number of video stories had gone up and up and up. And at the end of 3 weeks, he was getting 3 video stories first in his feed. Now, it is possible that that is simply him choosing to watch video stories. It is much more likely, when you look at Mark Zuckerberg's speeches, that he says video will be really important for Facebook next year. So there we have a classic example of how, you know, we don't know whether people are choosing to watch more video, whether they're being shown a lot more video and therefore they use it. We're in no control over that. And Facebook doesn't have to tell us. They really don't have to tell us. So yes, ultimately, the news comes from our newsrooms. But we don't have any control over where it's seen, how it's consumed. You know, we have to make sure it's kind of pretty good when people get there that they're not disappointed. But that's what I mean by we don't control the distribution chain anymore, and we don't understand it.
Would the Mirror like to say something about that?
I don't think it's questioning there. Completely agrees. That's good.
Any questions then?
Yes, there's one here, one over there, one over there. Oh. Here.
Hello.
Hello. You looked after my water. You can ask a question.
Thank you. As you're saying, obviously more and more sites are now building upon social media and websites. Does that lead to a death of the homepage? And if so, what does that mean for sites' ability to promote certain content as part of an agenda?
I mean, it depends, doesn't it? Again, So the New York Times stated the homepage is dying in their innovation report. I think we worked out that the homepage was dying about 10 years ago. I'm not saying that in a competitive way. I'm just saying that it's sort of one of those perpetual cycles one hears about. And then every so often somebody will say, no, but apps now are really important. You know, so basically, if you're making anything for a desktop, you're wasting your time. That, you know, everything is consumed through here. So actually, maybe if you can get people to install your app, the homepage or the top scroll is coming back. So, I mean, this is what I mean about we're terrible at counting journalism. Because, you know, what I do know now, I now work with a world-class statistician, which we are the dangerous fools who put Mark Hansen, who's a leading statistician, not just in America, but in the world, and knows all sorts of things about data and data visualization and how to use it for creative purposes. So, you know, these numbers can mean, or they are biases too, you know, kind of like we attach ourselves to a certain set of metrics. And we say, look, use of the homepage is coming down. I mean, the one thing I do think is that I'm sure it's changed and all automated now. If you are spending a lot of time editing your homepage and it's not being done by an algorithm, you probably really are wasting your time. So I think that, you know, you shouldn't be spending a lot of time on it. Sorry, there's frantic waving over there. Oh. No, she was first.
Sorry, yes, okay.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I just thought that was absolutely amazing. Really, really fantastic.
Thank you. Are you a student? Sorry, are you a student?
I'm a student at another university, and I'm a neuroscience student, but I'm very much interested because I'm going to relate to a study that was done. Do you know the Facebook study that was done?
Yes.
With the feeds and the emotions?
Yes.
So I look at the Daily Mail a lot, I'm sorry, and I do like looking at the Separaties as well. And something that you find sometimes is you've got a very serious kind of story running, and then you've got these feeds that are kind of quite trivial. Do you think that's going to kind of change the way in which people also access information as well, if you're having something very, very serious, and then you're having all kinds of...
So the study you're referring to is actually incredibly interesting. I'm going to move away from the light slightly for a melt. The study you're talking about is really, really interesting. I think it was it the one done with Cornell, which was...
Yeah, the neuroscience one.
Yeah, and it was like, can we make people feel a tiny bit happier by showing them certain sorts of posts? And they measured this by natural language processing, which looked at what people were posting after they'd been fed lots of very upbeat news. Now, you know, it may just be intuition, but at least this is an evidential basis for it, that actually what happened was that people did post slightly more optimistic stuff. So you can mess with people's moods on Facebook. When this came out, and it was a piece of academic research, it was always going to be posted, people went berserk and said, oh my God, this is terrible. This is like, you know, there was a Harvard professor actually at Davos last week who said, you know, prepare for the age of cyber McCarthyism. But actually, this was published research. What makes you think that Facebook don't do that all the time? And of course, the answer is they do it all the time. They do it absolutely all the time. In fact, they had another experiment which Jonathan Zittrain, who's a professor at Harvard, wrote up, with voting patterns, with can Facebook use its feed to up people turning out to vote? And the answer was yes, it could. We don't know where they're applying that, where they're not. We don't know what that effect would be if they decided to apply it selectively. I mean, the thing I would say, which I find, you know, there'll be someone here from Facebook who shouts at me about this later, but I do find it slightly incredible that when you talk very directly to social media companies about this, you know, these are the people who say we can cure cancer, we can put the internet into space. When you say, could you change the algorithm to show more political messages from one side or the other, they go, no, that's very complicated. It would be very, very surprising if but we can't really do that. To which I say, not true.
Do you think newspapers would also be...
Newspapers do. Newspapers do edit for outcomes. They always edit for outcomes, but we know that. And you can ask them. And they will use algorithms to do it. And when I'm talking about software values being put into journalism, that's exactly what I mean, which is open it up and show people how you are making your automated editing decisions. Don't just have an optimization desk, have a transparency desk. You know, have a desk that starts to deal with these problems, because they're coming. You know, they are, we will all be working, well, not me, I'll be in university, but we'll all be working in heavily automated newsrooms, way more so than now, with much smaller staffs within 10 years. And how we make those decisions at the moment, you have a public editor, you have description to the outside world. You're going to have to be transparent in completely different ways, I think.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think Lloyd wants to just carry on with that point.
I was just going to ask a question. What, if any, is the role of print in this digital world? So
I have a slightly bonkers theory. Bear with me. So print is going away. Print is going away in its current format because you just can't afford the industrial scale of printing. You know, it may be going away sort of more slowly for you than people with lower circulations. It may be more robust in certain communities than others. When Advanced Media in the States withdrew print in New Orleans, they relaunched a print product 6 months later. And they did so because actually there was just a section of the audience they completely lost. And again, civic purpose. So suddenly they found that seniors in New Orleans didn't know who'd died. They had no idea how to find out whether their friends were dead because they entirely relied on the obit session. So it wasn't necessarily the news, it was all sorts of other civic functions that the paper performed. So my slightly nutty theory is that we're reaching something called peak digital, which actually is a friend of mine who's one of my colleagues actually at Columbia, Susan McGregor. We were talking about this in the office the other day and extrapolating what we thought might happen in the future. And she said, well, you know, maybe it's peak digital. And we talked about this concept a bit. And then I went to Davos, and you had Eric Schmidt saying, which he would say, wouldn't he? It's a bit Mandy Rice Davis. He said, the internet is going to disappear. And by that he meant it's just going to become part of our lives. It's going to be woven into so many sensors, so many devices, surveillance technologies will be running all the time. We just won't notice it. Google certainly doesn't want you to notice it. And I think in that world, we will attach, and we already do attach, much higher value to physical assets. And I think that, and I'm going to predict this now, I think that print does actually have a future. Not in its current format, but I think it has one in the sense of, can you imagine if you are producing at lowish cost a specialist print product on a random basis which has, you know, a great deal of kind of, you know, uplift. It's a bit like when I worked at the Observer and they published it on a Wednesday, which had something to do with the Alphiades. You know, it's not something that you would routinely do. If you look at the Politico model in America, they do exactly that. So they start with very high tempo daily publishing, and then they sort of reverse engineered it into a print product once a week. And then every so often, like a really sort of advertising rich special on climate talks or something like that. I think we've got to detach our sentimentality about daily print from actually sort of, you know, that process of getting the paper out, the rumbling of the building, all of that. My God, you know, we will really miss it. But also, you know, audiences will miss kind of having a world where you can, where there are physical things, where there are design things. But print has to fit into that. It can't be something you need to read every morning on the tube. Does that sound completely bonkers? Okay, so I would have a print department. Oh, sorry.
Excuse me, I've waited 6 turns.
Yes.
One observation first on print.
Yes.
2014 was the first year in which sales of book in published form overtook Kindles.
Right.
That there seems to be an appetite for consuming books in the old format.
Was there a Harry Potter out? No, I was just asking.
No. It's a worldwide. Yeah, it's a worldwide phenomenon, and it's an interesting one. And people like possessing books, and whether it's But my question.
Yes. Vinyl is making a comeback. Jesus Christ.
Sorry?
I said vinyl. If vinyl can make a comeback,
well,
anything can make a comeback.
There's technical reasons for that. I'm told it's better quality music, better quality sound. No, I was going to ask a very simple question, which I thought you might address, but you didn't. There's lots of journalism out there.
Yeah.
But the ratio between readers, and you talked of these fantastic numbers, and those who are being paid to do it, is in drastic change.
Yes.
which the obvious implication, and just to ask the Horiel question, who's going to pay for it? Because the model is not working in terms of paid journalists.
Well, so this is why I think social platforms will, if you break off $1 billion and they can all afford it, but they're not going to do that as a mission. It's not in their DNA, I don't think. But they are going to do it, I think, because it's a business problem. I honestly think, if you talk to sort of any of the big social platforms now, they have all sorts of stresses on them they weren't expecting. So, for instance, if you have flagged content that you have to take down, if you're YouTube, often now it's extremely gruesome video. Child pornography, shootings in Syria, and these are sort of, these are people like the students here who have to go and remove that kind of stuff from the internet. There's no training around that. They weren't expecting it. They might be able to build an image recognition machine to do it, but they also might not. These are careful judgments that they haven't been held accountable for. But now, as the press sort of goes away, and as people genuinely see sort of Facebook or YouTube as their front page, they also associate them with those publishing decisions. So, will they employ reporters? I'm not sure. I mean, the other thing is that, journalism is a very attractive business, it turns out, for people with insane levels of wealth. Jeff Bezos has bought the Washington Post. Pierre Omidyar starting his whole new journalism. I think that's $500 million theoretically coming into journalism that wasn't there 2 years ago. It's quite addictive. Once people start this business of press ownership, they find it's like football clubs. Makes no economic sense whatsoever. But people want to stand, as somebody said, they want to stand next to cool shit. That's apparently a Silicon Valley term. And journalism, thanks to Alan and Janine and people like them, thanks to the Daily Mirror, thanks to David Walsh and Lance Armstrong, it's cool. I was at an educational conference the other day where somebody from a university who will remain nameless said, I've taken journalism off the title of my course and I've put media in instead. And I said, I think that is the stupidest decision anybody has ever made in naming any course ever. I did actually say that, and then I felt I shouldn't probably have said that. I was a bit rude. But we had a great conversation about it. And I was saying, this sort of toxicity of journalism is something that actually does go away when journalism really works, when it becomes the default, when it becomes the default representative, an institution of power for public interest. Because there isn't, we haven't replaced that. We have not replaced it. And we're not going to. Sorry, does that answer? That was a bit shouty.
What's the monetisation?
Well, the monetisation I think I've just explained, which is, sorry, I do say that sometimes. I've got to stop my lectury tone. So what I think is it's multiple revenue streams. And I think that you will, the press made a loss for a long time, and it was supported by people who wanted to champion particular political interests. There's a lot of wealth in the world, and there are a lot of people seeking influence. There are a lot of foundations now like Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, the Knight Foundation in the States, who all think that journalism sort of creates an impact that you can't create anywhere else. Propublica, which started in the States in 2005, as an entirely not-for-profit investigative unit, everybody said it would fail. And here we are, I think 1 or 2 Pulitzers later, 5 years, newsroom of 40 people, and it's one of the most effective organisations in the States for reporting certain types of story. So, it's kind of, we're always surprised at where these, and I'm not being blasé about it. Can we generate the same revenues that we used to? No. Should we all be paid what we were in 1985? No. Is this like being a teacher or a doctor or some other public service mission job? Yes. Is it going to be for the wealthy? No, I don't think so. Can we sustain it if we work on that basis? Yes, absolutely.
Can we take the last question? Yeah, Emily. Hi, Rupert.
Oh, hello, Rupert.
Hi, Lou. Speaking as Lloyd's agent to be, because the question I have is you interchange quite often the sort of words journalism and editing.
Yes.
Is there a case that says in an oversupplied world that actually consumer journalism will explode, as you said, but actually the value of great editing will go up? And therefore Lloyd will be like a footballer, extremely highly paid, and I'd like to be his agent. Is there any chance of that?
No, there is no chance of that. There is actually no... Well, there is actually, there is actually a chance of that. If Lloyd wants to come and do one of our courses at Columbia and build a brilliant algorithm which imports journalistic values into editing algorithms, then I think he would make a lot of money. Probably working as an intern at Google in the holidays, because they get paid, I discover, more than I do. But yes, I mean, that's the thing, is that that's the supply chain.
Okay, right. We have organised a reception for you, so if you want to stand next to some cool shit upstairs.
I hope it's literally cool.
Great expression.
I'm very hot.
I've got to get a swear word in. You see. And so, I mean, I just want to say thank you very much indeed on behalf of us all for a really fascinating public.